Actually, I don't really want to match the political rhetoric. I want to do something else, which is to talk about what I think this is all actually about and has been about for the last few years, and I hope will continue to be for some years to come. I think actually, despite some of the things you just heard, there is emerging a considerable consensus, which is entirely welcome. Let me step back from the grand macroscopic stuff and just talk about a few experiences in my own patch in West Dorset, which are the things that stick in my mind and make me enthusiastic about a certain way of looking at these things. So there was a pub in a place called Shipton Gorge in my constituency, and the publican left, and before they could replace the man and his wife who'd been looking after it, the owners of the pub decided they would close it, and the villagers decided that they didn't want to close their pub, they wanted to keep it open. And we had a series of discussions with the owners of the pub, who were extremely sceptical about the ability of locals to run anything like a pub. And in fact, they had all sorts of explanations why it couldn't possibly be done, and would quickly collapse. I recently, with my wife, went to a sort of little celebratory lunch in that pub, which is completely transformed, lovingly remade, and has a completely different feel to it, and it's chock-a-block, and has astonished the owners by turning a healthy profit. And it wasn't remade by groups of people arriving from some government department or local authority, nor was it remade by some huge multinational firm. It was remade by the locals. Turned out in that village, they had just about every skill that was required to remake a pub. And because they'd all participated in it, they hadn't just built a pub, they built an enormous amount of social capital. And it's their pub. And they love it, and they don't have to send around desperate notices saying use it or lose it, because they're using it because they like it. And they want to be there in the day and in the evenings. And it works. And it's worked for the village. And it's brought the village together. Let me take you to my own village of Thorncombe. It was a somewhat similar experience with the village shop. Again, the people who were running it left, and everyone said, oh, it's going to disappear. And some of us sat around in my garden, and we decided that actually it was possible to take it over and run it as a village shop for and by the community. And it's really much the same story. I don't know whether any of you have ever seen it in the newspapers, but if you're ever in Dorset, you should come to it. It's the most beautiful village shop in England. Anybody here who thinks they've got a more beautiful one is wrong. And it is going along, and we're, most of us, shareholders in it, not literally, to a very great financial extent. And many of us also are people who serve in the shop, and I serve about once a month, and when I do, I've often forgotten how to work the till. Well, it doesn't matter, because the people who are coming to buy also know how to work the till, because they also serve in the shop, and they can help me. And a few months ago, I was selling a Mirror newspaper, which, as you might imagine, is not a newspaper of my choice, to one of my constituents, who's also to do with the shop. And she said to me, you know, I've met more people in this village in the last few months as a result of this shock than I knew in the preceding 30 years. So when we talk about building social capital with endeavours like that, it's not some abstract thing. It is actually a matter of bringing human beings together in a different relationship that creates bonds and networks and all sorts of other things that sociologists love talking about, but which are real and an emotional force. And they also have an enormously practical effect. And we're very, very slowly rediscovering this in the great discussions we have about huge issues involving tens of billions or hundreds of billions of pounds. Because one of the great problems that our nation currently faces and will continue to face, regardless of who's in government, next parliament or the parliament after that, we're all getting older, living longer, which is a good thing. But one of the effects is we get frail, and one of the effects of that is that it's very easy to have accidents or fall ill. And one of the effects of that is that if that's prevented, don't do enough to prevent it, don't do enough to spot it early, then the people concerned end up in A&E. If they end up in A&E, very often they don't get discharged back to their homes under conditions where somebody has, again, invested to make sure that they're properly looked after, and then they might have another fall, they go back into A&E, they go back into residential care. Suddenly, before you know where you are, it's an absolute horror tale for them and their families, but it's also tops up to tens of billions of pounds of spending through the Social Service Department and Health Service. When you come right down to it, part of the solution to those huge problems is right down at the micro level. Is there somebody who's actually knows Mrs. Jones? Is there somebody who goes to see Mrs. Jones? Is there somebody who will notice if Mrs. Jones doesn't appear by her paper at the local shop? And we're sort of gradually, painfully rediscovering a truth which our ancestors knew for a very long time, but was sort of implicit rather than explicit, which is that the fabric of society supports people and makes sustainable public services in a modern welfare state in a way that nothing else possibly can. You just can't ever design enough of an apparatus from the top down to replace this network of knowledge and affiliation and understanding with all its subtleties and all its emotional intelligence. So, when you have the village shop, you have the village pub, you have the village hall, you have the societies that make up a village, or in a town, all these things are a bit larger. When you have those things, you have a network, you have social capital, things work vastly better than if those things are absent. Now, our vision of the future for town and parish councils is not, therefore, a future which is to do with structures or politics, or even particularly sort of grand concepts like devolution. It's got much more to do with trying to get to a position where that kind of social capital is built by people participating quite directly and cooperatively in forging their own futures, so that they come to develop those kinds of relationships and come to feel a real sense of what is too often described as if it was a sort of jargon term, as a community. Everything can be described as a community, but a real community is a community in the sense that people feel part of something and therefore feel a bond, a real emotional bond with the other people who are part of that, and therefore create an intrinsic, a natural, an emotionally strong and a sustainable network of support. And there's something else that then happens, which is that when people begin to feel that it isn't someone else but them, they form part of what we call a big society. They actually have the power to determine their own futures. When they feel that, then all sorts of attitudes change and all sorts of things get better. I remember talking to a woman who's now a baroness, and she's an educator. She did performed various important roles in British education. But at a much earlier stage of her career, she was in the western part of Canada, I think in Saskatchewan, if I remember correctly. It's incredibly cold there. And she was in the northern part in a small town, and the snow came and it was feet thick, and the roads completely cut off. She went into the local bar, got herself something to warm herself, some tottle, and she said to two guys who were standing further down the bar, why don't they do something to clear the roads? As an English person arriving there. And the two looked at her, and one of them said, Mrs., hereabouts, them's us. Which is a very powerful statement. They recognised that it wasn't somebody else who did these things. It was down to them. They were in charge and felt in charge of their own destiny. Now that's what I think we need to achieve up and down the towns and villages and neighbourhoods of Britain. And we need to do that in all sorts of ways. I think the most powerful mechanism we've so far found is neighbourhood planning. And I was overjoyed to hear the previous speaker say that the Labour Party would continue to support neighbourhood planning, because I very much hope that this will never become a political football, that it will be something which not just the two coalition parties, but all three major parties, indeed all parties, sign on to and develop and sustain. Now, when we began the idea of neighbourhood planning, I remember talking about it in my office in Parliament when we were in opposition 9 or 10 years ago. There's a great deal of scepticism expressed. I heard all sorts of people who know a great deal about the planning system explaining why it would never work. And even once we worked out how it could work, a very, very large number of people said, well, nobody will take it up. And I've been in many, many parts of Britain where talking to people about it until at least very recently, and still sometimes now, people don't really believe, or didn't really believe, that anybody would really give them any real power over planning. And they have a good deal of evidence about that, because nobody had given anybody really local any real power over planning for as long as anyone can remember. So it seemed an implausible thing. Well, what's happened? What's happened is that we now have over 1,200 different neighbourhoods in Britain engaged in neighbourhood planning. And although it's only been going for a couple of years, we're beginning now to see the first plans reach fruition, pass their examination, get through referendums. Incidentally, amongst those that have so far faced a referendum, usually with enormously high, eye-wateringly high turnouts and approval rates. And what's happened is people have discovered they do have real power. And it's of course, the town and parish councils where they exist, or the neighbourhood forums, which I hope will become the prototypes of councils in areas that haven't been parished, that take the lead. But this is not something that's just done by a group of people who have been elected or co-opted. It's done by everybody. I wandered into a village hall in my own constituency recently to go to a meeting about something. They said, you're in the wrong place. And I said, but isn't this the village hall? They said, yes. But the meeting you were going to is in the little room next door. We need the big hall for all the people who come to talk about neighbourhood planning. And this has been my experience everywhere. once people realise that they actually have some power to determine a really important part of their future, I'm sure everyone in this room has had the experience of just how stirred up people do get when it comes to a planning issue in their own locality, then they want to participate. And something really miraculous has happened, except that actually it's exactly what we predicted would happen and which nobody believed would happen, which is that when people do start participating in this, they do not act as NIMBYs. They do not set up machine gun nests against development. That's what happens when somebody from the outside comes along and says, you are going to have 200 extra houses in a village which has only got 150 houses today, and they're going to be somewhere you don't want them, and they'll look like something you don't want them to look like. And by the way, you don't have any choice in the matter, and yes, you can make an objection or have your planning group issue a verdict, but actually nobody's going to pay the slightest attention to it. Then you get the machine guns. But what's happened in neighbourhood planning is once people have actually had the power, they've begun to have what exactly you would expect, really, which is grown-up discussions. They've begun to say to themselves, okay, so we do need some more houses in this place, but we don't want them here, we want them here. We don't want them to look like that, we want them to look like this. And as people gradually discover they can actually decide those sorts of things for themselves, what has been happening is that in each of these cases, more houses are allowed than the local plan has forced to occur. I've got a constituency case in this, which happens to be one of the leading edge ones, just about to come to its referendum in the next few days. And it's a place called Cernabas. I don't know if anyone knows it here, but Cernabas is one of the most beautiful villages in Britain. It's got an extraordinary proliferation of really glorious medieval cottages and thatched roofs, and for years, anybody suggesting building anything in Cernabas led to a sort of small volunteer army of people who were willing to shoot, blow up, or anything else, anyone who made such a suggestion. So the neighbourhood plan started getting going. Huge proportion of people in the village got involved. Our local plan, our draft local plan, is just going through its examination, stipulates no building whatsoever in Cernabas. What happened? People in Cernabas decided they did want some housing, actually. But they wanted it to look like the housing that's there, and they wanted it to be of a kind that the place could fit. And that's exactly what they've proposed. And I don't know what the result of the referendum will be, but let me bet you that there'll be overwhelming support for it and a very high turnout. And this is a huge transformation. And this is what we need to see. We need to see not another level of bureaucratic activity, not a power grab by one set of people against another set of people, but on the contrary, the means of handing over to the people who actually live somewhere, of forging their own futures, participating, not just watching, not just making it accountable, actually taking it on themselves, involving themselves in their community facilities, in their community activities, in their community assets, in the planning of their community, so that they get to know one another, work together, feel like a community, become a set of people who are making their own future lives together. That genuinely can be a transformation. That can give us a very different Britain, and one that I think will pay huge dividends over decades and indeed centuries in terms of a better society, reduced crime, better support for elderly people, better care of the young, and into a future which collects the best of our past, in the sense of trying to provide, for example, for young people as they grow up, a sense that they are part of the community, and people are there to help them, but also there to watch them. So that you aren't alone when you're bringing up your children. You aren't alone when you're an elderly person. You're part of a place. You're part of a place where other people and you both feel you have some investment in it, because you have invested in it, and because you are collectively controlling it. And I think that's an incredibly important shift. The last thing I want to say is, I'm sure that there will continue to be further developments and further policies as we move forward. But actually, I think the really important thing now is to make use of the tools that are already available. I hope on a consensual basis right across the party, so that this lasts for years and years and years and builds and builds and builds. Because I think we already now do have in place the basic mechanisms for making the kind of social capital that I'm talking about grow right the length and breadth of England. And I hope that you will play your part in that. Certainly, we intend to do so. Thank you.